In 1999, a grand jury indicted JonBenét Ramsey's parents for child abuse and cover-up, but the police hid this for 14 years. Why? And what does this document reveal that no one was supposed to know? This is the story they tried to bury. December 26, 1996, 5:52 a.m. Patsy Ramsey dials 911. Her 6-year-old daughter has disappeared. A ransom note demands $118,000. But 8 hours later, John Ramsey finds JonBenét dead in their OWN basement. The note was fake. The kidnapping was fake. And someone in that house knew the truth. Today I'm going to reveal what was in that secret document and why it changes everything you thought you knew about this case. But first, you need to understand what happened that Christmas night. The Ramsey family returned home from a Christmas party at 9:30 p.m. JonBenét, a child beauty pageant queen with blonde hair and a bright smile, was carried to bed asleep by her father. It was the last time they would see their daughter alive. The next morning, Patsy Ramsey woke up around 5:30 a.m. and began her morning routine. As she descended the spiral staircase, she discovered several sheets of white paper on the steps. She picked them up and began reading. It was a ransom note. The note was handwritten on paper from a notepad inside the Ramsey home. It was unusually long, 2.5 pages. Most ransom notes are brief, just a few sentences. This one was detailed, almost theatrical. The note began, "Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully. We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction. We respect your business but not the country that it serves. At this time, we have your daughter in our possession." The note demanded exactly $118,000 in cash, to be delivered in a brown paper bag. The money was to be in specific denominations, $100,000 in $100 bills and $18,000 in $20 bills. That specific amount immediately stood out. It was nearly identical to John Ramsey's recent Christmas bonus from his company, $118,117.50. How would a stranger, a member of a small foreign faction, know that precise detail about John Ramsey's compensation? The note warned the family not to contact police, the FBI, or any other authority. It stated that JonBenét would be beheaded if they did not follow instructions precisely. It said the kidnappers would call between 8 and 10 a.m. with further instructions. The note ended with, "Victory, SBTC." The meaning of SBTC has never been definitively determined. Patsy's screams brought John running downstairs. They immediately checked JonBenét's bedroom. Her bed was empty. Burke was asleep in his room. Despite the ransom note's explicit warning not to contact authorities, Patsy called 911 at 5:52 a.m. Boulder police were dispatched immediately. At 5:59 a.m., just 7 minutes after the 911 call, Officer Rick French arrived at the Ramsey residence. He was the first law enforcement officer on scene. Officer French's initial assessment was that this was a kidnapping case. He had a ransom note, he had a missing child, he had frantic parents. He conducted what he later described as a cursory search of the house, looking for signs of forced entry or the missing child. He checked the main floor and the upper floors. Then he went to the basement. The basement was a complex space. It had multiple rooms, including a boiler room, a storage area, and a wine cellar. The wine cellar was a small room accessible through a white wooden door, secured with a simple wooden latch. Officer French approached this door during his search. He later testified that he tried the door but did not open it. He stated that the wooden latch appeared to be secured from the outside, leading him to believe that no one could be inside the room. He moved on without opening the door. This decision would be identified later as one of the most catastrophic mistakes in the early investigation. JonBenét's body was behind that door. As morning progressed, the Ramsey home began to fill with people. This was another critical mistake in crime scene management. John Ramsey called his pilot and arranged for the family to fly to Atlanta later that day. Patsy called friends asking them to come over for support. Within an hour, several friends had arrived at the house. These well-meaning friends moved throughout the house attempting to comfort the distraught parents. They prepared food in the kitchen. They sat in the living room. They walked through various rooms. Each person who entered the house and moved through its rooms was potentially contaminating what should have been treated as a crime scene from the moment police arrived. The protocol for a reported kidnapping should have been to immediately secure the house, limit access to essential personnel only, and preserve all potential evidence. Instead, the Ramsey home became a gathering place for friends and family with multiple people touching surfaces, moving objects, and destroying the pristine condition of potential evidence. Detective Linda Arndt arrived at the Ramsey home around 8 a.m. She was assigned to take over the investigation and wait with the family for the ransom call that the note promised would come. Between 8 and 10 a.m., Detective Arndt was experienced, but she arrived alone. In her later testimony and interviews, she described feeling increasingly concerned about being the only detective on scene for a case of this magnitude. She requested backup multiple times. She asked for additional detectives, for crime scene technicians, for FBI agents. Her requests were not fulfilled in a timely manner. The promised ransom call never came. 8 a.m. passed, 9 a.m. passed, 10 a.m. passed, no call. As the hours ticked by with no ransom call, the dynamics of the investigation began to shift. If this was truly a kidnapping for ransom, why hadn't the kidnappers called? The silence was ominous. It suggested that perhaps this was not a kidnapping at all. At 1 p.m., nearly 7 hours after police first arrived and more than 7 hours since the ransom call window had closed, Detective Aunt made a decision. She asked John Ramsey and his friend Fleet White to search the house again from top to bottom. She instructed them to look for anything unusual, anything that might have been missed, anything that might provide a clue about JonBenét's whereabouts. This decision to have the victim's father search the house has been criticized extensively by law enforcement experts. John Ramsey and Fleet White began on the upper floors and worked their way down. They checked closets, bathrooms, and bedrooms. Then they went to the basement. Fleet White checked the train room first. Then John Ramsey went directly to the wine cellar. He opened the white wooden door. Inside the small windowless room, on a white blanket on the concrete floor, was JonBenet. John Ramsey screamed. The sound brought Fleet White running. John immediately reached down and picked up his daughter's body. He pulled the duct tape off her mouth. He carried her out of the wine cellar through the basement and up the stairs to the main floor. Detective Aunt heard the commotion and saw John Ramsey emerging from the basement carrying JonBenét's lifeless body. He laid her on the floor in the living room. Detective Aunt immediately saw that the child was deceased. JonBenét's skin was pale with areas of purplish discoloration consistent with lividity, the settling of blood after death. Her body was in full rigor mortis, meaning her muscles had stiffened. A process that typically begins 2 to 4 hours after death and becomes complete after 12 hours. There was a white cord loosely tied around JonBenét's right wrist. Another cord fashioned into a garrote with a wooden stick used to twist and tighten it was embedded in the skin of her neck. She was wearing a white long-sleeve shirt and white long underwear with a star pattern. The clothing was not what she had been wearing to bed, according to her parents. Detective Ahn immediately knew that the crime scene had been catastrophically compromised. John Ramsey had moved the body, destroying critical information about the position and condition of JonBenet, as she had been left by whoever killed her. The blanket she had been wrapped in was now disturbed. The duct tape was removed. Any trace evidence that might have been on the tape's adhesive surface had potentially been contaminated. The crime scene that should have been meticulously documented and processed had been irreparably altered. The autopsy of JonBenét Ramsey was conducted on December 27, 1996 by Dr. John Mayer, the Boulder County coroner. What he found painted a horrific picture of the final moments of a 6-year-old child's life. The official cause of death was asphyxiation due to strangulation associated with cranial trauma. JonBenet had sustained 2 catastrophic injuries, either of which could have been fatal. The first injury was a massive blow to the head. The right side of JonBenét's skull showed an 8.5-inch linear fracture with an associated rectangular area of hemorrhagic contusion on the right side of her brain. This was not a minor injury. The force required to cause this type of skull fracture in a child is tremendous. Experts later estimated it would be equivalent to falling from a 2-story building onto a hard surface or being struck with a heavy object swung with extreme force. The head injury had caused a significant subdural hematoma, a collection of blood between the brain and the skull. The injury would have rendered JonBenet unconscious almost immediately. However, the autopsy findings indicated that she did not die instantly from the head wound. Her brain showed swelling that takes time to develop, suggesting she survived for a period after the initial blow, though likely unconscious. The second injury was strangulation by garrote. A cord identified as white nylon cord similar to that used in the art of Macrane had been tied around JonBenet's neck. Attached to this cord was a wooden stick, later identified as a piece of one of Patsy Ramsey's paintbrush handles. The stick had been used to twist the cord, tightening it progressively around JonBenet's neck in the manner of a garrote. A device designed to strangle the cord had cut deeply into the skin of her neck, creating a furrow that measured approximately 1/4 to 1/2 inch wide. There was petechial hemorrhaging in her eyes. Small red spots caused by broken capillaries, a classic sign of strangulation. Her face showed some congestion and her tongue protruded slightly, both consistent with asphyxiation. The critical question for investigators and pathologists was the sequence and timing of these injuries. Did the head blow come first or the strangulation? How much time passed between the two? Dr. Meyer's autopsy findings combined with later expert analysis suggested that the head injury came first. The brain swelling indicated that JonBenet's heart was still beating for some time after the skull was fractured, pumping blood into the damaged area. Most experts who have reviewed the case believe that JonBenet was struck on the head first, rendering her unconscious, and then anywhere from 45 minutes to 2 hours later, the garrote was applied. This timing has profound implications for understanding what happened. It suggests that whoever killed JonBenet had time to think, to act, to make decisions after the initial head injury. This was not a single moment of violence. This was a sequence of events that unfolded over time. The autopsy revealed other findings that have been the subject of extensive analysis and debate. There was evidence of prior vaginal trauma that appeared to be chronic rather than acute. Some experts interpreted this as evidence of prior sexual abuse. Others argued that the findings could have innocent explanations. No semen was found. There was no definitive evidence of sexual assault on the night of her death, though the findings remain ambiguous and controversial. JonBenét's stomach contents indicated that she had eaten pineapple a few hours before her death. This detail became significant because a bowl of pineapple with a spoon in it was found on the kitchen table of the Ramsey home. The bowl had Burke's fingerprints on it, as well as Patsy's fingerprints on the bowl itself. Both John and Patsy Ramsey stated that they did not feed JonBenét pineapple that night and did not know when or how she ate it. This unexplained pineapple has become one of the small mysteries within the larger mystery of the case. The garrote found on JonBenét's neck was a particularly disturbing piece of evidence. It was constructed from white nylon cord and a section of one of Patsy's paintbrush handles. The paintbrush was from Patsy's art supply area in the basement. It had been broken into 3 pieces. One piece was incorporated into the garrote. The other 2 pieces were found still in Patsy's art supply tray. The construction of the garrote showed a level of deliberation. Someone had taken the time to break the paintbrush, fashion the cord into a garrote configuration with the stick used to twist and tighten, and then apply it to JonBenét's neck. This was not a spontaneous act of violence, but a calculated action. But what the police did in the hours and days that followed was so disastrous, it almost destroyed the case. In January 1997, the Boulder Police Department was under intense pressure. The JonBenét Ramsey case had become international news. Media trucks lined the streets outside the Ramsey home and the police station. Reporters from around the world descended on Boulder. The Boulder Police Department was a relatively small agency serving a college town known more for the University of Colorado than for violent crime. Homicides were rare. Child murders were virtually unheard of. The department had limited experience with cases of this magnitude and complexity. Commander John Eller was assigned to lead the investigation. He assembled a team of detectives, but the team was working under extraordinarily difficult circumstances. The crime scene had been compromised from the beginning. Physical evidence had been contaminated or destroyed. The victim's family had hired high-powered attorneys within days, and the media's scrutiny meant that every move the police made was analyzed and criticized publicly. The investigation quickly became divided between 2 primary theories. The first theory, favored by many Boulder detectives, was that someone inside the Ramsey home was responsible for JonBenét's death. The second theory, proposed by some investigators and later championed by outside experts, was that an intruder committed the crime. The theory of family involvement focused on several elements. There was no clear evidence of an intruder. The ransom note was written using materials from inside the home. The ransom amount matched John's bonus. Patsy could not be excluded as the note's author. The staging elements, the ransom note, the loose wrist bindings, suggested someone was creating a false narrative, and there were behavioral concerns about how the family responded in the hours and days after the murder. John and Patsy Ramsey's behavior was scrutinized intensely. In the hours after JonBenét's body was found, they did not behave in ways that investigators expected from grieving parents. John made arrangements to fly to Atlanta. Patsy was seen peeking through her fingers while her hands covered her face as if she were watching people's reactions. These observations were subjective and perhaps unfair, as there is no standard way to grieve, but they contributed to investigators' suspicions. The Ramseys also made decisions that frustrated investigators. On December 27th, less than 24 hours after their daughter's body was found, the Ramseys flew to Atlanta for JonBenét's funeral. They did not sit for formal police interviews before leaving Boulder. They hired prominent criminal defense attorneys and a team of other legal and public relations professionals. On the advice of their attorneys, John and Patsy Ramsey did not submit to formal interrogations by Boulder police for 4 months. This delay was their legal right, but it severely hampered the investigation. In most homicide cases, investigators interview family members extensively in the first hours and days when memories are fresh and when innocent. Parties are most cooperative because they desperately want to help find the killer. The Ramseys eventually agreed to separate interviews in April 1997. By then, 4 months had passed. Memories had faded. The Ramseys had been extensively briefed by their attorneys. The interviews, when they finally occurred, did not provide the breakthroughs investigators had hoped for. Detective Steve Thomas, one of the lead investigators on the case, became convinced that Patsy Ramsey was responsible for JonBenét's death. His theory, which he later detailed in a book published after he resigned from the police department, was that JonBenet had a bedwetting incident on Christmas night. Patsy, exhausted from the holidays and under stress, had reacted with rage, striking JonBenet and causing the head injury. Then, realizing what she had done, Patsy had staged the scene to appear like an intruder kidnapping and murder. In this theory, John either helped with the cover-up or was deceived by Patsy. This theory had some elements that fit the evidence. It explained the ransom note written on materials from the home. It explained the intimate knowledge of John's bonus amount. It explained why there was no clear evidence of an intruder. However, it required believing that a mother could inflict horrific violence on her daughter and then engage in elaborate staging, including writing a lengthy ransom note while her daughter lay dying or dead in the basement. Other investigators proposed variations on this theory. Some believed Burke, who was 9, might have struck his sister during a late-night confrontation, perhaps over the pineapple found in her stomach, and that the parents had covered up an accidental or impulsive killing by their son. This theory was even more disturbing to contemplate and had significant logical problems, but it persisted in some investigative circles and in public discussion. Burke Ramsey has vehemently denied any involvement in his sister's death. The district attorney's office, led by Alex Hunter, was more cautious about pursuing charges against the Ramseys. Hunter and his team worked with investigators from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation and consulted with outside experts. They recognized that the evidence was problematic. There was no clear physical evidence directly tying the Ramseys to the murder. The DNA evidence was beginning to point in another direction, and the case against the Ramseys was largely circumstantial. With Xanadu crime destroyed and parents not cooperating, police had 3 theories, but one of them would lead to the secret document that would change everything. In September 1998, a grand jury was convened to hear evidence in the case. Grand jury proceedings are secret, so the public did not know what evidence was presented or what witnesses testified. The grand jury met for over a year, hearing from dozens of witnesses and reviewing thousands of pages of documents and hundreds of pieces of evidence. In October 1999, District Attorney Alex Hunter announced that the grand jury had finished its work and that no charges would be filed against anyone in connection with JonBenét's death. He stated that the evidence was insufficient to warrant prosecution. Case closed. Right. Wrong. For 14 years, nitrogen monoxide 1 knew the truth. Until in 2013, a journalist sued the government to release the sealed documents. And what was inside shocked the world. The grand jury had voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey. The charges: first, child abuse resulting in death. Quote, did unlawfully, knowingly, recklessly and feloniously permit a child to be unreasonably placed in a situation which posed a threat of injury to the child's life or health, which resulted in the death of JonBenét Ramsey. Second, accessory to a crime. Quote, did render assistance to a person with intent to hinder, delay and prevent the discovery, detention, apprehension, prosecution, conviction and punishment of such person for the commission of a crime, knowing the person being assisted has committed and was suspected of the crime of murder in the first degree and child abuse resulting in death. Read that again. The grand jury didn't say the parents killed JonBenét. They said the parents knew who killed her and covered it up. This means they believed that another person killed JonBenét, someone the parents were protecting, who Burke, a relative, a family friend. But the prosecutor, Alex Hunter, refused to sign the indictment. Why? He stated publicly that, quote, the evidence was insufficient to prove the charges beyond a reasonable doubt in court, but the truth may be more sinister if he prosecuted and lost. The double jeopardy clause would mean the Ramseys could never be tried again for this crime, even if new evidence appeared. So Hunter made the decision not to prosecute, but to hide that the grand jury had indicted them. And for 14 years the public believed that the grand jury had cleared the Ramseys. The truth was the opposite. But there's more to this story. In 2003, unknown male DNA was found on JonBenét's underwear. In 2008, the same DNA was found on her long johns. Prosecutor Mary Lacey officially exonerated the Ramsey family. She issued a public apology, but experts disagree to this day. Touch DNA can transfer innocently from factories, stores, laundry. It doesn't necessarily mean that person was there during the crime, so who's right? In 2025, we may finally find out. The same technology that caught the Golden State Killer in 2018, forensic genetic genealogy, can be used on this case. John Ramsey, now in his 80s, is pressuring police. Use genetic genealogy. Test the DNA. Find my daughter's killer. In 2024, Boulder police confirmed, quote, testing is ongoing with the most recent technology. If the DNA is from the killer, we'll have a name within months. If it's not, we're back to square one. And the secret document from 1999 becomes the biggest clue again. The parents knew who killed JonBenét and protected that person. 28 years, a document hidden for 14 years, DNA that could change everything, and a 6-year-old girl who deserves justice. Someone knows what happened that Christmas night, and in 2025, the truth may finally come to light. If you have any information about this case, contact Boulder Police. A detail that seems insignificant could be the key. Subscribe to follow when the truth is revealed, because JonBenét Ramsey deserves justice, her family deserves answers, and the truth deserves to be told.